Good afternoon from the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'm meteorologist Donald Jones with your 4:30 p.m. update on what is now a stronger Tropical Storm Francine. Somebody posted on here just now that I'm late. Well, we're a government organization. What do you expect? You get what you pay for. It's your tax dollars at work. No, I'm just kidding. We actually have had quite a few updates with the afternoon briefing package this afternoon, so I was trying to get the last minute slides and everything put together to get you the latest and greatest on all of that. Because we have some significant updates and some changes with regards to the forecast here going forward. So we're going to talk about all of that here over the next little while. As always, we are going to answer your weather questions just as soon as I wrap up our briefing. So since we are late, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. Again, Francine is a stronger storm this afternoon. Maximum sustained winds are now up to 65 miles per hour. That makes it a kind of a mid-range to a stronger tropical storm. It needs to get to 74 plus miles per hour to reach Category 1 strength, which it is expected to do either tonight or tomorrow. Now, we are now forecasting an even stronger storm at landfall. I've been telling you throughout the day today and since last night that we have looking at the possibility of a Category 2 storm. Well, the National Hurricane Center is now officially forecasting a Category 2 storm at landfall with maximum sustained winds near 100 miles per hour. So we are looking at the possibility of a stronger storm. Now, of course, that's going to beg the question, does that mean that it could potentially get even stronger than that? Yes, it does, unfortunately. It does mean that we could be looking at a more significant storm. It's not out of the realm of possibility that we could be looking at a Category 3 storm even at landfall if this trend continues and this intensification trend continues as well. The forecast track has shifted slightly to the west since the last advisory. Now landfall is anticipated to be somewhere right along the Cameron Parish, Vermilion Parish line, which is roughly about 20 or 30 miles further to the west than the previous advisory. So not a huge shift, but it is enough of a shift that it's going to have impacts going forward here as far as which areas are going to experience the most extreme conditions. Are additional shifts still possible as we go through the night and into tomorrow? Absolutely. One of the reasons for the shift this afternoon is that Hurricane Hunter aircraft were out in the storm and actually discovered the center of circulation had kind of redeveloped a little bit off to the northwest of where the previous center of circulation was. Now, we don't expect that to happen again because the center of circulation is now pretty well defined. In fact, taking a look at let's jump forward here, and then I'll come back to that. Taking a look at the satellite imagery this afternoon, you can see the center of circulation is much better defined. In fact, it has a little bit of what would be probably an eye feature right up in that area there, and that's becoming more and more evident on the visible satellite this afternoon. Let me make this actually full screen so it's not washed out on the TV behind me. So you can kind of get a little bit better view of what we're looking at there. You can see a much better defined storm this afternoon with some rain bands beginning to wrap into the storm. You can see that eye feature beginning to develop. That is an indication of a steadily intensifying storm, and we expect that to continue through the night and through pretty much the entire day tomorrow as conditions do remain favorable across much of the Gulf of Mexico. Taking a look now at the, go back, this thing's killing me. Taking a look at the 4 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center, if I can actually get it to come up. What is going on? I said something about your tax dollars at work. All right, there we go. So this is the 4 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. I'll go ahead and make this full screen for you so you can take a closer look at it. Maximum sustained winds are near 65 miles per hour, making it a mid-range tropical storm at this point. It has increased in forward speed a little bit. That may be partially due to the center of circulation reforming, but it is moving now to the north-northwest at about 7 miles per hour, which is a little bit faster than it was previously. Again, the big kind of take-home message from this, though, is the storm is expected to be stronger at landfall, which is now expected to be a little bit earlier, partially due to that reformation of the center. So we're looking more of a Wednesday afternoon landfall time frame now, as opposed to Wednesday evening, which we were talking about previously. So you see the little dot there at 1 p.m. Wednesday just offshore. So we're looking at a landfall probably now sometime between about noon and 4 p.m. Wednesday afternoon, which means the onset of those tropical storm force winds are going to be a little bit earlier in the day as well. We'll talk about that here in just a second. So this has changed somewhat from the previous advisory. The other point of note on this graphic that I want to show you here, we were talking about yesterday how most of the strongest winds were on the west side of the storm. But now you can see the center of circulation there denoted by that X, and the areas highlighted in orange, that's the extent of the tropical storm wind field. You can see there is now a fairly decent sized tropical storm force wind field on the southern and eastern sides of the storm. That's yet another indication that the storm is getting itself better organized this afternoon, and expect that trend to continue through the night and into tomorrow. Here's the other big change with this forecast package. Those hurricane watches that we had out earlier this morning, they have been upgraded to hurricane warnings. So we do now have hurricane warnings in effect for Cameron Parish, as well as Lower Vermilion Parish, Lower Iberia, and coastal portions of St. Mary Parish as well, including the adjacent coastal waters. So essentially all of the coastal waters south of southwest Louisiana and southeast Texas now under hurricane warnings. The areas in the darker reds there, those are areas that are now under tropical storm warnings. So Jefferson County, Orange County, southern Jasper and Newton counties, you're under tropical storm warnings now, as well as Calcasieu, Beauregard, Jeff Davis, Allen, Acadia, Evangeline, Lafayette, St. Landry, and Upper St. Martin parishes, you are under tropical storm warnings. Lower St. Martin Parish, I think, is under the hurricane warning. That's why that's differentiated there. So yeah, these watches have been upgraded to hurricane warnings with this advisory. That's pretty much the last major hurdle between watches and warnings. So you're not going to see this graphic change a whole lot. If the forecast track shifts significantly from where it is now, we could see additional parishes or counties added to these tropical storm watches and warnings. But this is where we're expecting either those tropical storm or hurricane conditions to be at this time. In addition to that, the storm surge watch that we had in effect earlier has now been upgraded also to a storm surge warning. This is issued when we're expecting storm surge of 3 feet or greater, and in some areas we're expecting it to be more significantly higher than 3 feet. So these storm surge warnings now in effect for southern coastal parts of Jefferson County, coastal parts of Cameron Parish, Vermilion Parish, and then down towards St. Mary Parish and Iberia Parish as well, and points further east into southeast Louisiana now under this storm surge warning in place of the storm surge watch that was in effect earlier. Let's take a look now at the tropical storm force wind speed probabilities. We're looking at anywhere between about a 70 to 90% chance now of seeing tropical storm force winds across coastal portions of Cameron, Vermilion, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes. And those areas are actually under hurricane warnings because the probabilities are increasing of hurricane force conditions in those areas as well. There's about a 60 to 80% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds across southwest Louisiana and south central Louisiana away from the immediate coastline. So essentially roughly along and south of the I-10 corridor. Still looking at very high chances of seeing those tropical storm force winds. A little bit further to the west, there's a 50 to 70% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds across southern parts of Jefferson and Orange counties. This has actually come up a little bit from because of that slight westward shift in the track. And then as we get a little bit further north up towards central Louisiana, you're looking at anywhere between about a 30 to 50% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds up that way. As we get further to the east into southeast Louisiana, you can see kind of the yellow and orange colors there, also indicating about a 30 to 50% chance of seeing those tropical storm force winds. These values will continue to increase as the storm continues to intensify and approach the coastline. This is based on the current time to arrival. That's partially what these probabilities are based on. So as we get closer in time, those probabilities will climb further. Here are the probabilities of seeing hurricane force winds. So we're looking at a 20 to 30% probability of seeing hurricane force winds across coastal parts of Cameron, Vermilion, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary. And there's roughly about a 5 to 10% probability of seeing hurricane force winds from Orange over towards Lake Charles to Lafayette. So the probabilities are not particularly high, but there is a possibility we could be looking at hurricane force winds in the Lake Charles and or Lafayette areas. Probably not both, but one or the other at this point does have the potential to see those hurricane force winds. And that'll begin very late Tuesday night into early Wednesday morning. We'll talk about the timing here. Actually, we'll talk about the timing here right now. Let me go ahead and make that full screen for you again. Also, so what we're looking at here is the most likely time of arrival for those tropical storm force winds. We've shown this graphic quite a bit. It's been fairly consistent the last day or so, showing a Wednesday morning on onset, but this is actually going to be a little bit earlier now than was previously identified. So now we're looking at the most likely time of arrival of those tropical storm force winds between about 6 and 10 a.m. Wednesday morning. So this is kind of, we've been calling this our deadline. If you're making preparations, either to your home or getting supplies, or if you intend to evacuate, this is the time you want to have all of that done with. So we'll call it, we'll do it on the lower end. So we'll say by 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, you want to have all of those preparations and or evacuations complete. That's kind of your drop dead deadline where everything should be done with. Now, this is still subject to change. This time frame could change if the forecast track or intensity or size of the storm changes significantly between now and then. But at least based on the current forecast, this is when we're expecting between about 6 and 10 a.m. the onset of those tropical storm force winds. Now, the earliest that we're expecting any kind of tropical storm force winds is going to be Tuesday evening. This is what we call the earliest reasonable time of arrival. So if the storm were to speed up, for example, or get a little bit bigger, we could be looking at tropical storm force winds as early as 8 p.m. on Tuesday. But right now, the most likely time is going to be right around sunrise or shortly thereafter Wednesday morning. Taking a look now, if you've watched this briefing already, you've already seen me kind of go through this little spiel. The forecast philosophy, what's actually steering the storm, really hasn't changed a whole lot. So here we've got Tropical Storm Francine. We've got a fairly large area of high pressure over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So we've got this clockwise rotation over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, something like that. And then we have a stationary frontal boundary that's sitting right along the coastline. So essentially what's going to happen here is the northerly flow around this high pressure system is going to push Francine. Right now it's moving kind of to the north-northwest. It's going to take more of a gradually northward turn and eventually move off to the northeast as it begins to feel the effects of this cold front that's sitting over the Cameron coastline here, the northern Gulf Coast. These winds are actually blowing more kind of easterly, maybe ever so slightly north of easterly. That is what's going to kind of steer the storm inland, and then it's going to steer it off to the northeast. Now, the good news, if there is a bit of good news with this, is that the storm will likely be accelerating into that cold front. The winds that are associated with that boundary are much stronger. So as it approaches that boundary, it's going to begin to accelerate. So we're going to be looking at an increase in forward speed. We're anticipating a forward speed of roughly about 15 miles per hour, thereabouts at landfall. So this is not going to be a storm that's going to stall and sit over the same area for days on end. It is going to come through here. We're going to have significant impacts, but it's going to get out of here again also. It's not something we're going to be dealing with for many, many days once it actually makes landfall. Sea surface temperatures over the Gulf of Mexico remain elevated and certainly supportive of tropical storm conditions. We are looking at anywhere between 86 to 88 degree Fahrenheit sea surface temperatures. That's certainly supportive of tropical development, and the storm remains in a very favorable environment for that development. Looking at the wind shear remains very light across the southern and western Gulf of Mexico. That is also very much favors intensification, which we're expecting to continue to see over the next day or so. As the storm approaches that cold front we were just talking about, the wind shear is expected to pick up. So we may see a little bit, at least, of a leveling off of the intensity, if not some slight decrease in intensity right before landfall. But I'm not hanging my hat on that. That's not a foregone conclusion. If that boundary moves a little bit further inland, then that wind shear would not affect it in time to have a significant impact on its intensity. So while it is a possibility, we're not necessarily explicitly calling for that in the official forecast, at least not at this time. Again, the forecast intensity has actually come up. We're looking at about a 100 mile per hour hurricane. So that would make it a Category 2 hurricane at landfall sometime on Wednesday morning. We're still looking at a very high rainfall threat across the region. Beginning tomorrow, this is actually going to begin well out ahead of the hurricane force winds. We're going to be looking at those outer rain bands beginning to move ashore across southern parts of Louisiana and even parts of southeast Texas. So we are going to be looking at a slight risk of what we call excessive rainfall. It's essentially a slight risk of flash flooding as we go through the day tomorrow in the areas highlighted in yellow. So that does include the Beaumont-Port Arthur area over towards Lake Charles, Lafayette, down towards New Iberia, parts of southeast Louisiana, essentially south of Baton Rouge. And then as we get into Wednesday, that overall risk shifts much further inland and increases. The areas highlighted in red there, that's at least a 40% chance of seeing flash flooding, and it covers a fairly wide swath, essentially all of South Louisiana and into parts of southern Mississippi as well. So all that, the entire southern Louisiana region will be at fairly high risk of flash flooding on Wednesday, which would make sense as we're talking about a landfalling hurricane. The overall risk is a little bit lower back across southeast Texas, because at least right now it looks like you're going to be on the western side of this storm. We tend to see less overall rainfall on the western side of storms, so the overall risk for flash flooding is a little bit lower. This is our official forecast for rainfall totals as it stands right now. We're looking at anywhere between 6 to 8 inches along the immediate coastline. The remainder of the region looking at a pretty large swath of 4 to 6 inches. But anywhere we see those rain bands begin to train over the same area for a long period of time, if you're familiar with tropical systems at all, you kind of know what I'm talking about, where rain bands just kind of move over the same area over and over and over again. We could see much higher rainfall totals than are being indicated here. So this is kind of what we call our widespread amounts. But anywhere we get that training, we could be looking at much higher amounts across smaller areas. So just kind of bear that in mind, that this is not the absolute maximum amount of rainfall that you can potentially see out of this system. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see well over a foot of rain in a few locations where those rain bands do happen to set up. We are also looking at a fairly significant storm surge threat with this system, the highest essentially from Cameron east to Port Fourchon, where we're expecting peak storm surge between 5 and 10 feet. West of the storm, we're looking at the potential for 3 to 5 feet. And as we get a little bit further east into southeast Louisiana, 4 to 7 feet and 2 to 4 feet east of the mouth of the Mississippi River. Now, what's important to keep in mind about this is that not everybody is going to see this 5 to 10 foot swath. And some areas are not going to see any real significant storm surge as well at all. This is kind of our worst case scenario, if you will. So areas that are on the left side, the west side of the storm, are not going to see much in the way of storm surge, because you're going to be looking at northerly winds. Now, depending on how the storm approaches the coastline, we could be looking at some northwesterly winds out ahead of it. That could push in some minor coastal flooding, but it's probably not going to be on the order of magnitude that we're talking about here. So areas along and east of that center of circulation are going to be looking at the potential for 5 to up to 10 feet of storm surge in some locations. That'll be further refined here as we get a little bit closer in time to the storm actually making landfall. And finally, we do have, I've been getting a lot of questions about this, the potential for tornado risks. We saw a lot of this in Hurricane Beryl earlier this summer. All tropical systems have the potential to produce tornadoes, and this one is not going to be an exception. Tornadoes in tropical systems tend to, just like being on the worst side of the storm, the vast majority of them occur on the right side or the east side of the storm, and that is likely to be the case with this storm. So we're essentially looking at the tornado risk extending along and east of where we expect the center to make landfall. So that's roughly from Lake Charles across all of southern Louisiana, with particular emphasis on southeast Louisiana as being most at risk of potentially seeing tornadoes with this system. So Baton Rouge down towards New Iberia, Houma, New Orleans, Slidell, those areas are being highlighted in a higher overall risk for potential tornadoes. But that tornado risk does extend all the way back to as far west as Lake Charles, and as far north as up towards Alexandria, even just east of Monroe, into parts of southern Mississippi. So a fairly wide swath of potential tornado damage. Essentially, anywhere we see one of those rain bands associated with this system moving across an area, there will be the potential for a quick spin-up tornado. Now, the interesting thing, or the thing about tornadoes and hurricanes that separate them from other tornadoes, they tend to be very, very fast moving. And they tend to be very short-lived. Some of them might only last a minute or two, but if they're moving at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour with the overall flow of the storm, it can cover a lot of ground very quickly. And oftentimes they don't show up on radar. So if we see a tornado on radar, we will issue a tornado warning for it, but that's not always the case because it doesn't always show up. And sometimes by the time it does show up on radar, it's already gone. So it can be very difficult to issue tornado warnings during landfalling hurricanes for tornadoes, just because of how fast they're moving and how quick they develop and then subsequently dissipate. So just kind of bear that in mind as we go through this event, that there is the possibility of those quick spin-up tornadoes, and there may not be a whole lot of warning with them. So that's what we have here from this afternoon from the National Weather Service. I'm going to put our next briefing schedule up here. We are going to do another one of these briefings at 10:30 p.m. this evening with the new update due out from the National Hurricane Center at 10 p.m. And then we'll do another whole set of them here going through the day tomorrow, 10:30, 4:30, and 10:30 tomorrow as well. If it looks like there are significant changes between those times, we will provide another update in between those briefings if there's a significant change. But that is kind of the schedule going forward here. So our next briefing here will be late tonight at 10:30. And then we're not going to do, the Hurricane Center does put out a full update at 4 a.m. in the morning, but we're not going to do an update for that because most people are sleeping at that time. So we will have the next update following that will be at 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. So kind of bear that in mind. If you don't have any questions, you're welcome to head on out. We'll see you back here late this evening. If you do have a question, stick around. I'll be happy to answer them here over the next few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and scroll through here and see if we do have any questions. So bear with me just a moment. For some people, this is their favorite part. They get to listen to me ramble on and make fun of people occasionally. I'll try not to do that too much. Natalie says, so prep hurricane snacks for 2 to 3 days starting today because they'll be gone by tomorrow. Exactly. Yes. No, here, this is what you do, okay? You go get the hurricane snacks. You eat the hurricane snacks. Then you got to go get a second round of hurricane snacks before, the hurricane actually gets here. So those will be your actual hurricane snacks. So it's kind of like you get your pre-hurricane snacks and then your hurricane snacks, your actual hurricane snacks. See, Chance knows what I'm talking about. Already started eating my hurricane snacks. I'm not good at this. See, that's what I'm talking about. You got to get 2 sets of hurricane snacks. You got to get your stress eating hurricane snacks, and then you got to get your hurricane snacks. Okay, let's see. I've got a lot of people asking about their individual areas. I don't want to get too in the weeds with that because we could be here all night asking about every individual location. I'll try to answer a couple of them, but please don't be offended if I don't answer yours specifically. I'm trying to get to as many of them as I can, but there are a lot of questions like these out there. Concerned about family in Acadia Parish. How rough will it get there? For Acadia Parish, we are going to be looking at, some pretty good, at least tropical storm force winds. You are in a tropical storm warning, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of rainfall, and you are going to be in that tornado threat area. For those of you who are curious about the parishes, we are going to do our individual parish by parish and county by county breakdown. That's going to probably come tomorrow. Because we're still kind of seeing some fairly decent wobbles back and forth with the forecast track. I don't want to get in a situation where I tell you things are going to be one way and then the track shifts and then it's going to be completely different. We got to backtrack. So I want to kind of make sure we've got a pretty good handle on where the storm's going to go before I get into exact specifics of what to expect with regards to that. So those are coming, but probably not until tomorrow morning. Paula asks, what time is the next update? Next update is 10:30 p.m. this evening. You can see that behind me and our schedule as we go through tomorrow. Rhonda says that NBC News said that the hurricane is making landfall in an uninhabited swampland in Louisiana with very little chance of hurting people. Well, invite them on down. Tell them to come check it out. See if there's any people here that have lives. Unfortunately, I don't want to talk bad about the national news media, but there is some of that, admittedly. Janet says, almost 3,000 viewers. You're quite popular today, Donald. Yeah, well, I usually get popular this time of year when, death and destruction reigns. I'm not nearly as popular when things are nice and calm and pretty outside. Running through comments here, trying to find questions that don't involve what about my house. I'm not trying to make fun of you. I do recognize that everybody's concerned about what's happening to them and their families. I just can't answer every single question about every exact location. Kathy says, please review rain bands, likely timing start. So basically what we're going to be looking at for the onset of those rain bands, we're going to be seeing them actually start tomorrow. Probably going to be more tomorrow afternoon, later in the day. I don't think we're going to have too much in the way of rain bands tomorrow morning necessarily, but by tomorrow afternoon, we will start seeing some of those outer rain bands working in, and then they'll gradually increase in coverage as we go into Tuesday night and Wednesday. And again, we're looking at landfall expected Wednesday afternoon now, with the onset of those tropical storm force winds beginning Wednesday morning between about 6 and 10 a.m. So the rain bands are going to likely come ahead of the actual tropical storm force winds. But as we get into Wednesday morning, you're going to experience them kind of simultaneously. Usually we'll get a band that'll have some heavy rainfall. It'll also have tropical storm force winds in it. And then that rain band will move out and the winds will lighten back up again a little bit. Then the next band will come in and you'll get another round of tropical storm force winds. So a lot of times you don't have tropical storm force wind gusts between rain bands. They're only within the rain bands themselves. So that's something to kind of keep in mind also. Phyllis is asking, should Calcasieu evacuate? At this time, there are no evacuation orders for Calcasieu. The only evacuation order that I'm aware of right now is Lower Cameron Parish did issue an evacuation order. That is the only one that is presently in effect. James McDuffie asks, how long is the high pressure system in the Gulf going to stick around? Long enough to get this system through our area. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't looked at the extended forecast because I've kind of been focusing on this, but it's going to be there as long as Francine is moving through the Gulf. Rachel asks, how far out from the eye do the hurricane force winds extend? Well, right now, none, because there aren't any actual hurricane force winds out there, because we're still looking at a tropical storm. Now, as far as the forecast goes, let me take a look here real quick. And I'm looking at what are called the wind radii. And this is a product that's actually put out by the National Hurricane Center, where they forecast the extent of the hurricane force winds. So right now, just before landfall, we're looking at 25 miles from the center in pretty much every direction, between 20 and 25 miles away from the center. So the hurricane force winds are not going to be very wide. If you think about, if you're talking, that's a radii. So if you talk diameter, you're talking 40 miles across, 20 miles on either side of the center of circulation. As compare that to, say, the tropical storm force winds, which extend out, let me take a look at what that one is, 100 miles to 120 miles on the eastern, essentially on the eastern side of the storm. So roughly, the tropical storm force winds extend roughly about 5 times further out than the hurricane force winds. So you're looking at a fairly narrow band, relatively speaking, of hurricane force winds compared to tropical storm force winds. Amanda says there was a website y'all provided in the past storms that detailed storm surge. What was it? You can see that. It's actually on the National Hurricane Center's website. So if you go to hurricanes.gov or just Google National Hurricane Center and then click on Francine, there is a map on there that it says it's labeled storm surge. And you can zoom in to very close and actually see what kind of storm surge is being predicted for specific areas. It's called inundation on there, but it's the same thing. Uriah says, will Mississippi see significant damage? Looking about relocating there. I'm assuming you mean evacuating there. There is the potential for some tropical storm force winds in parts of southern Mississippi as the storm begins to move inland. You're also going to be looking at probably a fair amount of rainfall across parts of southern Mississippi. I don't have very detailed information because we don't specifically cover that area. But the fact that the remnants or the decaying storm is going to be moving that direction, you're going to be looking at probably some tropical storm force wind gusts and rain over that way. Katie asks, do you think it will shift east again? I'm not sure about it shifting east again necessarily, one way versus the other. It could just as well shift west again. I do expect there to continue to be some small shifts with each subsequent advisory. So again, we're looking at the cone of uncertainty right now, essentially extending from just west of the Texas-Louisiana state line to as far east as right around, looks like right around Houma or thereabouts. So there is still opportunity there for additional shifts. You know, we've kind of stayed within that cone, which is exactly what the Hurricane Center wants to do. But yeah, there is still opportunity there for the center, the forecast track to shift either east or west tonight and pretty much all day tomorrow. Jennifer's asking about the possibility of tornadoes. Again, we talked about that a little bit. There is going to be the risk of tornadoes. Tornadoes tend to form along and east of the center of circulation on the quote-unquote dirty side, as they call it. So we are looking at a risk of tornadoes. This is mainly going to be on Wednesday, which is when the storm is going to be making landfall, so that makes sense. The highest overall risk is going to be across south central and southeast Louisiana. You're in that slight risk for tornadoes right now, which is the category 2 out of 5 on the Storm Prediction Center scale. But there is still a risk of tornadoes, essentially from Lake Charles to Lafayette. It's a little bit lower overall risk right now, but there is still going to be a risk of those quick spin-up tornadoes. And again, like we were talking about earlier with tornadoes in hurricanes, they're often moving very, very quickly, and they're often very short-lived. So there may not always be a tornado warning with those tornadoes that form in hurricanes. John says, I live in Ville Platte. I know you touched on tropical storm force winds around the I-10 corridor. Could we expect some of those winds where I live? St. Landry Parish is under a tropical storm warning, and the probabilities of tropical storm force winds, I can pull those back up for you here real quick. We're looking at, you're essentially kind of in this dark brownish, ugly, whatever, baby poop color. That's a 50 to 60% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds in St. Landry Parish. So that, and combine that with the tropical storm warning, yeah, we are expecting some gusty winds to tropical storm force. If I had to estimate it right now, based on where it's going to be moving, probably looking at 50 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts, not out of the realm of possibility for the Ville Platte area. Lorna asked, why is Lake Charles included in the tornado since we are still on the west side still so far? Don't have any idea whether to evacuate or not. Well, you're not going to evacuate for the risk of tornadoes, just like you wouldn't evacuate for a cold front that has the potential to produce tornadoes. The thing you want to evacuate for in most cases is the storm surge, to a lesser extent, the flooding rainfall threat. The vast majority of deaths that occur in tropical systems are due to flood-related deaths. That's something like 75% of deaths in tropical storm or hurricane-related fatalities is due to water. Very few are actually related to wind. The wind can certainly do some catastrophic damage, as we're all very familiar with, but it's the water that kills people. So that's what we really want to be concerned about evacuating from. To answer your question directly, the reason that Lake Charles is still included in the possibility of tornadoes is because while the vast majority of tornadoes do occur on the east or the right-hand side of the storm, that doesn't mean all of them. So there is still the possibility that we could see some tornadoes on the west side of the storm. This also gives us a little bit of leeway in the event that that track shifts further to the west, that we've already had kind of a bit of a risk area there. So it's not impossible for tornadoes to form on the west side, in the western eye wall or in a western rain band. It's just not particularly common. So yeah, there is still a risk. It's lower risk, but it is still there. Keith says, I'll have whiskey, you can keep snacks. Why not have some of both? I mean, that's a good time. Now it's a party. Hurricane party. I'm not advocating for hurricane parties. I'm just to be clear. And when anybody coming back and said Donald said have a hurricane party, I did not say that. I did not say it, but I didn't say it. Sailor Coterie 5. How long do you think people in Louisiana will lose power for when it hits? Yeah, I knew that. That depends on how strong the winds are, how much damage is done to the energy infrastructure. I don't have a good answer for you for that. For some people, it could be just a matter of a couple of hours. Some people may not lose power at all. Other people may be down for days or even weeks, depending on how much the electrical infrastructure is damaged. When Beryl went through Houston, there were people that were out for weeks. When Laura and Delta came through here, I think we were out for over a week for Delta and 3 to 4 weeks for Laura. So it just depends on how much of the energy infrastructure is damaged and how long it takes to repair. Unfortunately, that's not nearly as forecastable. Devin asks, where do you guys go during a hurricane? Do you stay at the National Weather Service? We've stayed here for most hurricanes. The only one that we've evacuated for was Laura, which I think was a good decision. But generally, we do stay here for most hurricanes. Now, depending on how strong this one is and how close we are to it, we'll decide what to do with this one. But we do stay. We stayed for Delta. And this building that we're in, the Weather Service office here, is built to withstand those kind of winds. So we're perfectly safe in here. This building survived Laura without any problems. So I think we can take just about the worst that Mother Nature throws at it. Chris asks, what's the possibility of an evacuation being made for Calcasieu Parish? I can't really say. I can't give you a likelihood, a probability. That's completely up to the emergency management and local elected officials. That's their decisions and theirs alone. We briefed them. We just briefed them before we came on the air here. So they are receiving the exact same information that you are. So they make those decisions based on that and their plans that they have for different scenarios. Courtney asks, how likely do you think it may shift west again? I don't know about being particularly likely, but it is possible. Just as easily could see a shift back to the east. I'm not saying that it's more likely either way at this point. We're just going to have to see how subsequent computer model runs come in, how strong the storm looks, because the intensity of the storm and its structure can play a role in how the steering currents interact with it. So there's a lot that's why I can't just say if I knew it was going to go one way or the other, then we would have already put it there. So I can't really say with certainty. What's the criteria for them to issue a mandatory evacuation for Lake Charles? I don't know off the top of my head. You'd have to ask your emergency manager that question. Nicole says, I was just telling my team about your black shirts this morning, and then ta-da, they're back. Ta-da, don't you wish they weren't back? I certainly wish they weren't back. When they're back, bad things are happening. Justin says, we've seen some tracks being off this year. Any indicators that this storm could ride either side of the NHC forecast track? Indicators, no. Could it happen? Absolutely. That's why we have a cone of uncertainty. But like I said a little while ago, if I knew that we were wrong, then we would fix it and we wouldn't be wrong anymore. So the forecast that you see behind me is based on our best analysis right now and the best analysis of the National Hurricane Center. And that changes with time, as the storm, intensifies, slight variations in the forecast track are inform future track adjustments. So, that's not something that I can't predict whether we're going to be wrong or not. Of course, some people would say meteorologists are always wrong, so that's easy to predict. But if we were wrong and we knew it, we would have already fixed it. So right now, this is our best forecast based on the information we have. Clark says, Donald, our disaster relief task force is pre-deploying tomorrow. Suggested best or safer-ish place to pre-deploy to. Well, it depends on where you're coming from. I think right now, Southeast Texas is probably looking the safest on an absolute basis. I would, if you can, get on the west side. So, Beaumont, points west of Beaumont. That would probably be your safest bet at the moment. I wouldn't stay on the east side of the storm, because even if the track holds true, you're still going to be looking at a large swath of rain and tropical storm force winds into south central, southeast Louisiana. So you're looking at a much larger swath of damage. So I would be on the west side of the storm if you could. Tommy stopped by Albertsons this morning to pick up a couple of things and didn't stop to think that everybody and their brother would be in there stocking up for the storm. It was crazy. Well, what? Well, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Everybody needs their hurricane snackies. Jure asks, is it possible for the intensity to upgrade to a 3 before landfall? Yes. Right now, we are officially forecasting a Category 2 hurricane at landfall, but we always say prepare for one category higher than what we're forecasting. So, yes, I would be prepared for a Category 3. It is not completely out of the realm of possibility at this point. A couple other people asking about the possibility of it being a Category 3. Yes, again, it's not out of the realm of possibility, especially since now that we are explicitly forecasting a Category 2 at landfall. That's one thing that the science is getting better at, but there is still a lot of forecast error when it comes to the intensity of storms. And the reason for that is there's so many more variables that go into it. Small scale variables, things that are much more difficult to identify unless you have a lot of sensors actually in the storm itself. So we're much more likely to be off by intensity more so than the actual track location. Kathy says, no one's mentioning power outages. What's your thoughts for Calcasieu Parish? That's determining whether I leave or not. There are certainly going to be power outages from this. I have no doubt about that. Based on the current forecast track, I would imagine there would be some power outages in Calcasieu Parish from at least very strong tropical storm force winds. It's difficult to predict power outages as you get further away from the center of circulation. It's almost a certainty that the areas in those hurricane force winds, those 20 miles either side of that eye, are going to lose power. That's a near certainty. But as you get a little bit further away, those winds get a little bit less. You're talking about gusts to maybe 40, 50. Then the power outages get a little more sporadic. But yes, I think there will be at least some power outages across Calcasieu Parish if the current forecast track holds true. Stella asks, would you advise not leaving Vernon Parish to go to Baton Rouge, as my neighbor's adult children are wanting her to do? I think Vernon Parish right now is going to be the safer place of the two compared to Baton Rouge. Vernon Parish is more likely to be on the west side of the storm. You're going to see less rain. You're going to see less wind. You're going to see a lower tornado threat. I think Vernon Parish would be the safer of the two areas right now.
Oh, man, thanks for letting me know about that.
Okay, just reading through questions here, trying to find some that I haven't answered yet. Eric's asking, will shelters be open to the public and special needs shelters for those that are vulnerable medical-wise, and the hospitals for those on life support and such? I don't have the answer to that either. Again, that's something that your emergency managers and elected officials will have answers to. Your mainstream media outlets, KPLC here in Lake Charles, KATC, LFY, etc., in over towards the Lafayette area, those are going to be good sources of information for that. because what happens is the emergency managers and the local elected officials, they make those decisions, they begin that process, and they give that information out to the media. So that's going to be the place to get that information. I don't have it personally. I've been focusing on the forecast and what the storm is going to bring more so than the emergency management response aspect. Okay, I'm about 10 minutes behind on comments. I'm trying to catch up here. Brenna asks, is it safer for people in mobile homes to evacuate? That's going to depend on exactly where you are. If you're right along the coast, then probably. If you're further inland and you're not going to be experiencing those hurricane force winds, you may be safe if you have the hurricane strap or the wind straps. In that case, that's just going to depend on your individual situation. I can't give a broad brush. Yes, anybody in a mobile home should evacuate. That's not what I'm saying. It just depends on what kind of mobile home you have, where it is, what kind of condition it's in, is it strapped down? So lots of different questions go into answering that. Brittany says, do you think Lake Charles will see 100-mile-per-hour winds? Not based on the current forecast track. Based on the current forecast track, we'll probably see strong tropical storm force winds in the Lake Charles area. I don't expect to see 100-mile-per-hour winds because the 100-mile-an-hour winds will be further east. And they're not going to last very long across coastal portions of Cameron and Vermilion Parish unless the storm is significantly stronger. If it makes landfall with 100-mile-an-hour winds, those 100-mile-an-hour winds are only going to get a few miles inland before starting to weaken. Sarah says, my 6th grade son wants to know what previous storm do you most compare this to? I don't like to compare one storm to another. And I talked about this in one of our previous briefings. The reason for that is every storm has its own separate structure and it approaches the coastline from different angles. So I don't like to compare storms directly to one another. And considering the fact that we don't know exactly how strong this storm is going to be at landfall, that's another reason not to do it. So I don't like to compare storms. I'm not going to compare this storm to a previous storm. When I start doing that, people start saying, oh, well, I was fine in that storm, so I'll be fine in this storm. And that's not always the case. I don't want to give you a false sense of security or scare you by comparing it to another storm and then you saying, oh, I was okay in this storm, or no, I had terrible damage in this storm, and making decisions based off of that. That's not a good way to go about making decisions. Several people asking, will I be giving a parish by parish breakdown like I have in the past? Yes, I will, but that's probably not going to come until tomorrow. At this point, again, we're still seeing fluctuations in the forecast track, so I don't want to give that information out and then have to take it back if the forecast track shifts significantly. So we're going to wait until at least tomorrow morning to do that. John and Missy asked, how wide is the eye? There's an eye beginning to form, but it's not exactly fully formed yet, so I can't really tell you how wide it is yet. I may be able to tell you later tonight, but it's still forming right now. I'm seeing a lot of questions that are unfortunately from outside of the area that we cover. So, for example, Slow Southern Style here is asking about Thibodaux. I'm deliberately not answering these questions because we don't have specific information for those locations. The Thibodaux area, basically anywhere east of Morgan City, and east of Opelousas, or as you get a little bit further inland, that's covered by the National Weather Service office in Slidell. They do provide their own Facebook Live updates. They have their own social media pages and forecast pages. They can provide you much more detail than I can. Right now, we're focusing on Southeast Texas and Southwest Louisiana, down to Morgan City, up towards Alexandria, west towards Beaumont, and points in between. That's kind of the area that our office covers. So I'm not. It's not that I'm ignoring you so much as that I just don't have the detailed information to give you. Frank says, how often do the hurricane tracker planes go out? They can often be constantly. They'll have one that'll go out, and as that one get ready to come back in, another one will go out. As the storm gets closer, usually that's how it winds up being. As of right now, I think they are allowing for a little bit of a delay in one versus the next, but they're usually out there every few hours or so right now. Yasmin says, I live in a mobile home in Grand Lake. Should I evacuate? Grand Lake is the only part of Cameron Parish that isn't in a mandatory evacuation. You're going to be looking at some pretty gusty winds out there, so I would certainly consider it in a mobile home. Again, I am not at, it's not my position to tell you whether you should or should not evacuate. I can't, in good faith, do that. That's the job of the emergency managers who have more detailed information on those areas, geography, and stuff along those lines. But if you feel unsafe, if you look and we're expecting, strong winds and you don't think that your shelter can withstand them, then you should strongly consider an evacuation. Bill says, not to be too critical, but this storm went from a strong tropical storm to possibly a Category 3. That's a huge difference. We are still a long way from accurate forecasts for storms, unfortunately. Well, actually, we've come a very long way from where we used to be, which used to be before we even had satellite data. We didn't have a clue that a storm was even coming. Since satellite data, that's gotten a lot better. But the forecast, both the forecast track and intensity, the actual forecasts statistically have improved dramatically from even within the last 10 years or so. So it's much better than it used to be. It's not perfect by any means. I'm not going to argue with you and pretend like it is. But that's why we update forecasts. That's why we update forecasts every few hours with the latest and greatest information, so that by the time it actually does start getting closer, we usually get pretty close in terms of the track and intensity. But at the very least, you knew there was a hurricane coming 2 days ago. That's something. It might not have been a Category 3 yet, but that gives you a heads up to at least begin preparing. A couple people asking about landfall. Yeah, we are looking at a landfall right now. So I can make this full screen for you. We're looking at Wednesday afternoon. That's a little bit earlier than was previously being indicated. We were talking Wednesday evening with the last advisory. This one is now looking at closer to, say, between about 1 and maybe 4 p.m. Wednesday afternoon. But the tropical storm force winds and the stronger winds are going to precede that. So, as is always the case. So we're looking at the onset of tropical storm force winds Wednesday morning. We're anticipating for Southeast Texas, Southwest Louisiana, between about 6 and 10 a.m. for the onset, of those tropical storm force winds on Wednesday morning. So yeah, Wednesday is D-Day for this storm. Brown Rhonda says, wait, it's a 3? No, it's not a 3. It's not even a hurricane yet. It's a tropical storm right now. Now, the forecast has it making landfall as a Category 2 hurricane with maximum winds of 100 miles per hour. The possibility of a Category 3 is there. It's not impossible that we could see that. That's not what's officially being forecast right now, but that forecast could be revised upwards, and we could potentially be looking at a 3. But the official forecast right now is a Category 2 hurricane at landfall with winds of 100 miles per hour. Natalie thinks Donald needs hurricane snacks. I think you're right, Natalie. I think everybody needs hurricane snacks. And I especially need some hurricane snacks. All right, we've been going on here for about an hour, so I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for the time being. If you have a question that I missed, or you have a question while you're viewing this as a recording, as many of you I know do, feel free to send us a direct message on Facebook. I'll be happy to answer your questions that way. I'm going to be here all evening, so got to give me something to do. You can also email me directly. My email is on your screen there. It's donald.jones@noaa.gov. I'm just kidding. I have plenty of stuff to do. It's not like I'm sitting here being bored, but I will happily answer all of your weather questions. You can also give us a call here at our office, area code 337-477-5285. We have forecasters here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, including during most hurricanes. So we'll be happy to answer your questions that way. You can also send us a message on X. You can also send us a message on Instagram. So lots of ways to get in touch with us. If you do still have any burning questions, we'll be happy to answer them for you. Our next briefing will be 10:30 p.m. this evening. We'll have the latest and greatest from the National Hurricane Center. That is due out at 10, and then we'll do our briefing at 10:30 p.m. this evening. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Stay safe, stay dry. We'll talk to you again at 10:30 tonight. Get some snackies. It'll be a good time. See you then.